I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Isabel May, who plays Elsa on 1883. And Isabel, when I watch this show, so much of Elsa is in her physicality. She, the physicality of this character is written into her. So I want to know, how much did you go into in terms of trying to prepare to portray that from just a physical point of view?
Oh goodness, quite a bit. I mean, first of all, you have to think, how did a young woman conduct herself at that time? Different era, different set of rules, and not only that, but the environment that she was raised in. They originate from Tennessee, and so I always envisioned that she grew up in this very small town, had communicated with very few people, and interacted with very few people, therefore sort of had the ability to be a little more wild, especially with a father like hers that kind of encouraged her to be able to do things on her own, which was very rare for a woman, especially a young one at that time, to get that kind of encouragement. So despite early on, it was important to me that, it be clear that her posture, she's very straight and poised, and yet despite the fact that she has her arms behind her back and is conducting herself properly, that this is going to deteriorate over time. So no matter, I each episode I kind of made sure to make a note of, okay, so it's been 3 months, she's here now, she's been on this horse for this long, she's been able to play with the boys and kind of detach herself from these rules and these restrictions that she was always operating under. So it was really, really important. And it's interesting. I think the reason I almost feel flabbergasted by the question or something is because I've never been asked it. So I appreciate it. It's a great question. But yeah, and then, on a horse, it's rather uncomfortable riding a horse with a corset on. And so the moment that I got to take that off, as much as I was so relieved by it, and I thought, okay, I want to see this start to happen to her a little bit. When you ride horses anyway, your core has to be really stable, and you can tell when someone is a horseback rider and when they're not, just by their posture. They have to look comfortable. So yeah, I took quite a lot of thought into, every nook and cranny of her, to be honest. Maybe too much.
Well, and you've talked a lot about, Taylor Sheridan, the creator of the show, has this cowboy camp, and was all that new experience, or did you have experience on horseback before, or was it even anything close to what you experienced in the camp?
I'm anticipating the answer. No, I had no prior experience. Therefore, the moment that I knew that I had to be on a horse, I texted Taylor and I said, do you have someone out here in California, because he's in Texas? I need to have my butt on a horse's back right away, because I wanted to know what that felt like. And I did it almost every day. I drove from Los Angeles to Santa Clarita, which is almost a 2-hour drive. I would wake up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning to drive up there and work with her, because it would be so hot in the middle of the day, and up there it's unbearable heat. And her, as in the stunt coordinator's wife, her name is Deidre Rodriguez, a fascinating woman, tough as nails, and she has 2 little boys. And so I had to watch her, trying to train me as well as be a mother and a parent, and there was something really, I don't know, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've kind of fallen in love with that family, but also sort of gave me this, I almost felt like I was preparing in a sense. Elsa has a little brother, her own mother. It was a strange, really, really pleasant experience. But yeah, that was part of it for sure.
Well, and what I find so interesting about this show is that I don't think the show has the power that it does unless that family dynamic is believable. And when I spoke to Tim and Faith a couple of weeks ago, they were kind of taken aback. They both told me how they were kind of taken aback, like the first time they met you. They were like, "Oh my God, you look like their middle daughter." I think I think they pointed out. How did you work with them in terms of building that kind of family relationship?
Yeah, well, they came, I had been in Texas doing, I did pre-cowboy camp and then cowboy camp as well on top. So I sort of, I don't know, settled into what it was we were preparing to do. They came a couple of days before the end of cowboy camp. And I immediately just felt, I mean, Faith's one of the warmest people just that I've ever met, and a goofball and kind and sweet. And so she just kind of welcomed me in with open arms. And Tim was more someone that I gave space. He took what he was doing very seriously. And then I remember at first I thought, oh, he's kind of an intimidating figure. And the minute that you start to talk to me, you go, oh no, this guy is just very, very soft, gooey inside, but he has a strong exterior. And I remember when we were shooting, because we were shooting predominantly in Weatherford, Texas, but then we, for the first 2 weeks of shooting, had to drive up to Fort Worth, and we stayed in Fort Worth one night. And I went over to Faith's room where she was staying, and we just talked for hours and hours and hours about our characters. And then from there, it just bubbles over and it just happens. It's strange how one minute you think, oh, these are complete strangers, and the next you feel like you're part of their family. I don't know where the transition is between those two, contrasting things, but it happens. It just does.
Well, and I think one of the most important things about this show is not just because it's clear that Elsa and her father have a very, very tight-knit relationship, but I think the relationship between Elsa and her mother doesn't get short shrift either. I think it's just as powerful, as much about mothers and daughters.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite episodes is episode 3, in which, it's the first time you really see Elsa and her mother have to interact with one another and be with one another and deal with one another. And there's this transition from the beginning of the episode in which she feels stifled by her mother. She doesn't want to interact with her, deal with her. Towards the end, there's this shift where she starts to realize, oh, as any of us do, that's why it's so relatable. Oh, my mother, I am my mother. Or my mother is who I am now. She was that. And she gave that up for me and for her family. And so in that episode, she gets a sense of what was, because, we're always trying to think, who was my parent before I came around? And they were different. They were different people, and so anyway, that's one of my favorite episodes. Just the voiceover in that I thought was so beautiful and heart-wrenching, and made me think of my own mom. And yeah, my favorite relationship is Faith and I's relationship in this show, for sure.
I'm so glad you brought up the voiceover, because I think voiceover Elsa's character in voiceover is just as powerful as anything we see on screen.
Oh, thank you.
And it's not just narration. I mean, her voice changes depending on the emotion that she's going through on screen at the time. So what was that experience in terms of the recording of the narration like?
Yeah, I sat down and I went through all 10 episodes and wrote it out and memorized all of the dialogue, or all of the voiceover narration, just because I wanted it to kind of flow. I wanted it to feel like I was not reading from something, but just thinking them. I was just, the whole point of acting. So duh. And then from there, I sat down with Taylor and I just read all the way through it with the accent, because I had been working on that with a voice coach. We were trying to really pinpoint that down. It's a very specific accent, but there's a reason why it sounds the way it does, I promise. And I read it out loud to Taylor, just the two of us, and he just listened to me. And I remember closing my eyes and just saying the words. And the way that my instincts were to just say it as softly as possible, like I was whispering into someone's ear. And I wasn't sure if that was right. And it was so interesting, because that's exactly what Taylor wanted. And so I think what's so powerful about the voiceover is the fact that it's coming from someone whose lives, it's coming from someone who understands what death is, and has already lived all of these things, which, you know, you come to discover towards the end. And therefore, I think it's that much more impactful when you do get to that last episode. Oh, wow. She wasn't just describing the events that were occurring in real time. She was telling you what she hadn't understood then, and she now understands in whatever realm she's in. That's a weird way of answering that question, but it's the best way I can explain it.
It actually makes total sense, because I was gonna talk about, you know, those last 2 episodes really make such a kind of an emotional demand on you, because it's such a long process between, you know, to get there. And so I'm curious as to how you kind of emotionally were able to go to those places, and how did you deal with that?
In those last 2 episodes, those scenes. Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. We shot the first 4 episodes and then flew in Texas. And then we flew to Montana and I shot my death scene. And then jumped, which is episode 10, and then jumped back to 9, and then back to 10, and then 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way to the end. So it was just all over the place. But, you know, I'd outlined her entire trajectory. I knew every single moment that in why she felt a certain way. And then at the same time, once you get on set, you discover something that, you know, you couldn't possibly have known before being there. And just, I always listen to music. I made an album for her for each episode, you know, where she is in that moment, when she's falling in love, when tragedy occurs and she loses her love, so on and so forth. And in those last 2 episodes, it's really, I mean, I think that's one of the scariest things I could possibly imagine going through, knowing I'm going to die, and then, and just having to figure out how not to be scared. And I really don't care how brave you are. I don't think there's anything scarier than, you know, the end of this lifetime, because none of us really know what goes on after that. We certainly hope that there's something else, but we just don't know. So there are certain songs that I found that I just listened to endlessly, and it was strange because it's those moments that you're preparing for, and yet and are nervous about throughout the entire process, and that I was thinking about for months. The moment I got there, it was this weird release. I mean, it didn't feel hard necessarily. It just felt oddly satisfying.
Yeah, and you know, the series makes such obviously emotional demands, but it's also a very physically grueling experience as well. And so was one of those more challenging than the other, or did you kind of just approach them from the same kind of perspective?
Oh, at least for me, the physical challenges far outweighed the emotional challenges. I get a strange kick out of the emotional ones. I'm a rather just kind of mellow person. I don't really react to things in a heightened way. And so there's something about being able to just, I guess the best way I could word it is like tear out a little piece of your soul and hand it off to someone else. It feels really, really nice and kind of terrible at the same time. I don't know what that says about me, but I think most actors are like that, to be quite frank. I mean, it's like you have to convince what's interesting to me is you have to convince your body that you're going through something that you're not actually going through. Like trying to create a panic attack or something, and your body starts shivering and you know that it's not happening, but you've convinced it that it is. It's the same with, you know, fear, terror, overwhelming sadness. The physical challenges were far more frightening because when I was chased on a horse in, you know, 8-degree weather, or with, you know, certain actors that were wickedly good and talented horseback riders that were trying to slow down on my behalf because I got relatively good, but I am not an expert at horseback riding. And there were a couple moments where I got genuinely really, really scared. And yeah, I'm truly shocked that nothing bad happened to anyone. I mean, it's incredible because there were so many things, whether everything was just constantly not going our way. And I have this thing called plantar fasciitis on my right foot now because of the horseback riding. So yay, got something out of it. I could say honestly that it did have a physical impact on me.
I think there's a case to be made that characters like Elsa don't come around a lot and are kind of in a way role models for younger women. We certainly don't see them in Westerns very much. From a young woman's perspective, what did you kind of hope that viewers might take away from Elsa's journey?
Goodness, I think just take chances, and I mean, I think what was so impactful about her character for me is that she refused to apologize for doing what she felt was right, what she believed in. And I mean, even not to be, let's just say, I mean, she has sex with a man not out of wedlock, and is chastised by her mother for doing that because it was incredibly improper thing to do at that time. And despite the fact that she did feel shame and she did feel guilt, she refused to back down from the fact that she said, I love him, and it was a beautiful experience, and I'm not going to apologize for it. And she lived her life like that all the way to the end. And that's something that I really hope to embody. And I hope other people, I hope it gives them like a thrill. You know, you can do virtually anything. And even if you don't succeed at it at first, or even if it's not necessarily what people consider to be the right way to do something, if it feels right in your heart, just do it, because life is so damn short. I stopped going to school when I was in 9th grade. It's not necessarily the right thing for everyone, but I continued online schooling, but I knew that I loved doing this and I wanted to give it a chance, and I believed in myself. And so I'm doing it, and I'm so grateful that I did. And it was scary, but that's the whole point of, taking chances.
Incredibly well said.
Oh, okay. Glad.
Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout the season. Isabel May from 1883, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. So nice.